So I will call the meeting to order at 6:01. And we have our minute taker, and we're going to get right to the board reorganization agenda item with election of officers. And the first item is to elect a chair. So I will accept nominations for chair.
I'll nominate Krista.
All right, I hear a nomination
I
for
will
Krista.
also nominate Krista.
Okay. Any other nominations for chair? Hearing none, we have one nomination for chair. Krista, just to double check, do you accept the nomination?
I do.
All right. All those in favor of Krista as chair, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? All right, Krista, you are chair, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Congratulations, Krista.
Thank you. So I just have a few words to share. I just want to first thank everyone for placing your confidence in me to serve as the chair of the board over this next year. I have big shoes to fill, so I'll be leaning on all of you for your support along the way. And as we start this new chapter of our work, I'd like us to all just take a deep breath, because we have weathered some significant challenges over the past year that our entire educational community has felt. And as a board, we're tasked with balancing policy and advocacy, guidelines and demands, and finding the right amount of communication. We have what I think is the opportunity now to re-examine and build a stronger foundation for how we do our work. And this is going to take time, but I think we have the right tools and a really great and committed group of people here in this Zoom space to get the work done. And I think this is going to offer a greater sense of stability and support to our whole MAUSD community, which is very much needed now. Speaking of community, I do want to thank our community for their support of our work ahead, especially as evidenced by the passage with pretty strong margins of all of our warned articles on town meeting day. We have some really exciting work mapped out for us, such as exploring the expansion of our pre-K offerings, identifying our facilities priorities, and creating space for conversations about anti-racism and equity. These are big topics, but we're approaching them with an openness to partnerships with people outside of the board and administration. So I hope that our community will be inspired to join us in this work. I think then we can really learn how to lean on each other and find more commonalities than differences, which I think will really help to build the resiliency of our district. So with that said, I'm really excited to get underway. And before we move to electing our vice chair and clerk, I wanted to add 2 items to our agenda, because apparently I have the power to do that. So I'm going to use it right away. So first, under board management and governance, I wanted to add item H, which will be a discussion on filling vacant board seats. And then we will be needing an executive session at the end of the meeting under VSA 313A3, the employment evaluation of a district employee. So moving on, we are going to now elect our vice chair. So I'll accept any nominations for vice chair.
I'll nominate Aaron Jipner.
And is there a second? Do we need a second for nominations, actually?
I don't
I'm
think
not sure
so.
if we do. We don't. Okay. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? And Aaron, are you willing to accept this nomination?
I am.
Okay. So at this time, I'd like to call a vote for Aaron Jipner to serve as vice chair. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say nay. And any abstentions? Okay, well, congratulations, Erin. I think over the next year, she and I will be working really closely together. And so we'll both be looking for your support as we do the work of the next year. And then the next position we are looking to fill is for the clerk. We don't have formal job descriptions for the vice chair or the clerk. Typically, the clerk has pinch hit for minute taking when we've needed it. And also if there is a need for any documents to be signed specifically by the board clerk, then that person does that as well. So do I have any nominations for the clerk?
I'll nominate Liz Sayer.
And are there any other nominations? Hearing none, Liz, are you willing to accept this position again? Thank you very much for your service. Okay, so let's take a vote on Liz Sayer for the position of vice chair. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say nay. Any abstentions? Okay, great. Thank you, Liz. All right, so I will move now to public comment. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak? And just as a reminder, each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. And so we'll just ask that you try to adhere to that as best as you can. Sorry, Brenda, did I see your hand up?
Yes, you did.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I see that you have people speaking tonight on policy governance.
Mhm.
Am I correct?
Yes,
And
you're correct.
I would like to ask them a similar set of questions that I asked the board at the annual meeting. One is, why are the taxpayers called owners and not taxpayers or the public? And the second is, why are the public's questions never answered? I have been watching, it's not simply a matter of it being too difficult, because as we saw at the annual meeting, if someone asked a question that the board did not immediately know the answer to, they were told that they would be gotten back to. This is ever since there seems to be something inherent in not answering questions. I have not heard the board during a regular meeting answer a question of the public since the policy governance was adopted, something like 2 superintendents ago. So I'm interested in that. Is there something inherent about policy governance where the board does not interact directly with the public, or the public cannot have their questions answered? Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. We have both the folks, Phil Gore from the VSBA and Jeannie Collins, who's a former superintendent, who I think have already logged on. And so they've both heard your questions, so perhaps they can weave in to their comments some of that as we move through their presentation. Are there any other comments from the public at this time? I don't think I see any other hands up. So we will move now to hearing from Phil Gore. Phil's joining us from his phone where the internet is down in Montpelier. So he has a presentation to share that Patrick will queue up for him when he's ready. But we're really grateful to Phil for being here with us today to talk with us about some good governance practices, which we think is a great way to start off this new term, and also for board members that joined us mid-year and haven't had the chance to hear this before. So Phil, thanks for being with us, and I will turn it over to you.
Great. Well, Patrick can display those slides whenever it's convenient for him. Hopefully I can see them to know which slide he's on here from my phone. Internet is down all over the city of Montpelier, even at the State House. So here we are with conveniences of technology. I have been involved in school board development for 16 years. Prior to that, I was a school board member in the Seattle area. I have enough knowledge of policy governance to get me in trouble, but I'm not an expert in that area. So I will happily touch on the member of the public's question and comment, and I think that's good. And Jeannie can probably do a little bit a deeper dive on that. So I just want to lay out, again, foundations of good governance. And what is good governance? Well, I looked up a definition of governance itself, and often in a formal way, on the next slide, it shows governance is the rules of a political system. So often the term governance is used to discuss the scheme or the way in which people will solve conflicts between those that are involved and also adopt a decision. It's been used to describe the proper functioning of an institution and their acceptance by the public. I use the word legitimacy. Governance is that following a set of rules, if you will, that the public and the system has come to identify as legitimate. Really, which connects us to the next slide, which is what is good governance? So while every school board in the state of Vermont is practicing governance, if you will, there are some hallmarks of good governance. And one of the things, and this was well reported in a book that I co-edited for Harvard Education Press a few years ago. The title was Improving School Board Effectiveness, and the subtitle was A Balanced Governance Approach. And in that book, we talk a lot about how does the board balance the rights of individuals with the rights and goods of all. Like, right, there's often a tension between what is best or preferred for one person, whether that's a student, a staff member, a member of the public, or even a member of the board, versus what is best for the whole. So good governance has to grapple with and find that balance. It's also very important that good governance, it's not micromanaging the superintendent and the superintendent's staff. It's also not rubber stamping or giving just passive approval to everything that the board is presented with. In hand with that, the board needs to exercise critical thinking and not to necessarily be critical of the district, but not always being a Pollyanna or cheerleader of the district either. So finding that balance. And then finally, I think an area of good governance where it really requires balance is focusing on the ends or the results, in our case, student outcomes, versus the means or the processes. How will the system get to improving student outcomes? The board needs to be knowledgeable and informed of both, but ideally focused on the ends or the outcomes for how are the students doing. On the next slide, Tom Alsbury and I that edited that book, we begin to conceptualize this term, if you will, informed oversight. So all board members are informed enough to speak intelligibly about how students are doing and how the district is doing. And they're also informed and intelligent to be able to speak to what is the district doing to improve how students are doing. That is really important. And I would encourage you to reflect on that term as board members. What does it mean to exercise informed oversight? So you're not micromanaging the daily details or even the weekly or monthly details, but you are informed of what's happening. And by being informed, you're governing or you're operating for of what's going on. Well, let's talk a little bit about models of governance. On the next slide, I think this is important. Policy governance is a trademarked, very prescriptive form of governance. It is practiced by a lot of boards all over Vermont and, very importantly, all over the country. It was developed by what was a husband and wife team, sorry. And they would say, John Carver would say, that policy governance is the only model for governance. I get this question as a researcher and somebody working in school board development. I get this question about once every 6 months. There's some grad student somewhere or an administrator that's, working on a dissertation, and they'll say, well, Phil, what are the different models of governance? Well, there are a lot of things like what Tom and I proposed in that book of balanced governance. It's a scheme, if you will, or a framework, but none of these different alternatives to policy governance really rise to the level of what an academic would call a model, or sometimes even a framework. In fact, some school boards across the country, they practice coherent governance and other types of, labels of a governance structure that are really just a modification of policy governance. It's probably most typical in the school board where I serve. We really practiced what we called a modified policy governance. In other words, we didn't have all of the structure of policy governance, but we had the sense making of what's the role of policy in this. And in our policies, how have we delegated and authorized the superintendent to move forward? And what parameters or constraints have we put on the superintendent and the staff's work? And I know Jeannie will talk about this more in detail, but you'll recognize that basic structure that's used by nearly all of the 14,000 school boards in the US is kind of a modified version of policy governance. I won't pause here to take questions on this because you have a more expert person on policy governance than me about to speak later. So we'll move to the next slide, which again, this is just foundational. And this image is intended to just depict, and there are different ways to draw this. A lot of times you'll see this as a pyramid. If we were in person, I would love to draw it on a whiteboard. Let's talk about what happens at the strategic level, because that's the role of the board, is strategy. Big picture strategy, often referred to tactical level of how things will be accomplished in the district, and falls to the superintendent and the superintendent's administrator's domain of tactical, sometimes referred to as the 10,000 foot level. And then closer to the students, at the very operational level of teachers, bus drivers, custodians, administrative assistants, paraprofessionals, all of the folks who are employed by the district have a role to play, an operation to perform, if you will. They're very close to the student, but ultimately, school systems need to be concerned with what are the outcomes? What are the outcomes at the ground level? How are our students doing? Are they learning? Are they growing? Are they having wellness emotionally and socially? And I think all of that is really important. You'll notice, though, while there's sometimes where, a teacher who might be a teacher leader is sometimes operating at a tactical level, a superintendent who is also seated with the board and thinking strategically with them is also then helping administrators to operate at a tactical level. And in some small school systems, sometimes the superintendent's driving the kids to school in the bus or teaching a class as a substitute teacher. So it's not as though people in the system don't move in and out of these levels. In fact, it's not uncommon for school board members to be volunteers in the schools and bring things, either to reading to students or tutoring or assisting some way in their own child's classroom often, or even sometimes working as a coach. But notice that if the board is not executing at the strategic level, engaging with the community, involving the community, representing the community to the school system, and representing the school system back to the community. If the board's not doing its job, who will? It's certainly not the job of a teacher or a bus driver, and it's really not the job of the principal or the superintendent. Now, sometimes a principal or superintendent may need to serve as a spokesperson, but when it comes to engaging, and I know that the policy governance term, the owners, the speaker earlier mentioned, why are they called owners and not taxpayers or community members? I'll let Jeannie speak more to that. But there is that structure that kind of the board is representing the owners, or in a broader way, the board is representing the taxpayers or community on a strategic level. There are a lot of great metaphors for this. For any of you as board members that are interested, I would really encourage a book study on the book called The Governance Core. We had the lead author for The Governance Core do a webinar for VSBA members in January. It's on the homepage of our website still. It was very well attended and very popular. In my opinion, as a person who writes, The Governance Core is the best book you can buy on just good governance. In fact, there's a whole chapter in there, chapter 4, that's dedicated to onboarding new school board members, something that a lot of school boards kind of neglect to do well. And then there are some chapters in there about having a trustee mindset. So what does it mean to be a trustee who's been entrusted with the public's two most precious resources, their children and their money? What does that mean to function as a trustee, and for the superintendent to have a trustee mindset as well? Highly recommend that book. It's about $25 on Amazon or other book retailers. And I think you would find it $25 well spent. One of the metaphors that they use is of a forest fire or a wildfire, and they talk about the board being at that strategic level, kind of up in the helicopter, where they can see the big picture of where the needs are and how important it is that somebody's up in the helicopter seeing the big picture, not putting out the fires on the ground. One of the things that I've noticed through the years is that it's easy for board members, especially a brand new board member. We all want to be accountable and responsive, to start to think of ourselves as the customer complaint department. And the problem is, if we think of ourselves individually as the customer complaint department, then how are the people closest to the problem going to solve the problem if the board thinks at their level they're solving all the customers' problems? You'll find if that's you, you'll find your phone will be ringing off the hook and your email inbox will be full, because if word gets out that you're the one to solve people's problems, then they'll be lining up to come to you. And it's really a pitfall of not good governance to think that we as board members, or even the board as a whole, is there to be the customer complaint department. We do need to be responsive to the community. We can't solve people's problems effectively at the ground level, because we need to be thinking more strategically. I'm curious if anybody has any questions, reflections, thoughts on that. Just kind of the proper functioning of a board at a high level, seeing the big picture, exercising informed oversight. Any questions or comments on that? If there's a hand, I'll never see it. Not on my little phone screen here.
Hey, Phil, this is Kristen Toy. I was actually in your new board member Zoom meeting. I think it was week before last, and just wanted to comment that it was really, really helpful. And I really enjoyed the content that you shared, and just wanted to extend my thanks for that.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's good. And again, that's an area that most boards tend to neglect. New members, make them a full part of the team, assign a mentor, don't have like a one-shot sort of fire hydrant experience where they're told everything they ever need to know, but try to bring them along over time. it takes most of us, you veterans know, it takes most of us about 2 years to really figure out what we're doing as a school board member. And so I would just encourage, the whole board to reach out to new members and pull them in and be a resource, be a help to help them get up to speed. So if there aren't any more questions or comments, the next slide sort of begins to unveil what's emerging in the state of Vermont in a draft set of governance standards. These were required by last year's legislative session as part of district quality standards. The state, in its wisdom, saw that what school boards do actually makes a difference when it comes to student outcomes. And so there are these 3 areas that are proposed. There was a task force of school board members from all over the state who met with us and talked with researchers, state representatives, and experts in the field of school governance. What are the most essential things that board members need to know and be able to do? And out of that work has emerged this focus on priorities, the board getting crystal clear on what they want from the superintendent and the system. My understanding of policy governance is you do that with your ends policies. You have policies that specifically state these are the outcomes that we as a board are shooting for. Now, boards that don't practice policy governance, usually things aren't that clear, right? But it's important, I think it's of paramount importance, that the board and the system know this is what we're all supposed to be focused on. The second area in the draft standards that'll be complete with rulemaking later this summer is the area of governance protocols. Now, this is primarily a set of operating protocols for how the board will do its work together, how the board members individually will hold themselves accountable to one another. You may have a governance policy on this topic or an adopted board operating protocol, but how the board will respond to questions from the community or the media, a lot of times how the board will interact with the superintendent and the superintendent's staff. A lot of that is covered in the area of board protocols. And again, I think a hallmark of effective governance is really clear and agreed protocols that everybody on the board can agree, this is the way we do things here in Mount Abe School District. Related but different is the idea of governance processes. Again, in policy governance, you have superintendent evaluation. It's literally kind of baked into your process throughout the year. So that if you're following policy governance with fidelity at the time for when the superintendent evaluation is supposed to be completed, you've been doing that work throughout the year in the reporting out of your policies monthly. But a lot of boards don't have that kind of structure, and it's easy to take processes for granted. It was frustrating for me as a board member just to realize, man, there's a process for everything. Not only is there a process for how we evaluate the superintendent, there's a process for how we adopt a budget or propose a budget. There's a process for how we review what's happening in our schools. There's a process for looking at student achievement data. There's a process for everything, for policy review, for community engagement. But being mindful of our processes can help us be a school board that is transparent and predictable. Those words have become very important to me this year. And I think as you think about board processes, it's not a compliment if someone says, well, with this board, you never know what to expect, right? That's not a compliment. People that we're serving need to know what to expect. So one of your very important processes is a process for how you receive public comment. And I think, well noted is how will you respond to public comment? What will you do with public comment? And that's an area to be very clear on. I want to talk about 3 areas, maybe 4 here, of how we work well together. What does it mean to work specifically in these 3 areas on the next slide? What does it mean for board members to work well with each other, work well with the superintendent, and work well with the community? Now, there might be other groups or individuals that you could say, as a board, we need to really work well with our students, with our teachers, with our business leaders, subsets of the community. But in general, good governance requires that we're working well with each other. We know what to expect from each other. We're having necessary conversations, and we're working similarly well together as a board with the superintendent, and also well with the community. On the next slide, I outlined 4 different things that really speak to this idea of the board working well with each other. And yep, there's 3 on your slide, but there's a 4th on the latest version of this. That's good. You're on the right slide. Maybe. Okay. So differences of opinion. And again, interrupt me or have somebody interrupt me here if you want to add or question something I'm saying. How will the board handle differences of opinions? Hey, if you're really bored after your board meeting tonight, do a Google search for school boards gone wild. And you'll find what some people will call an outlier or a rogue member or a problem member. That's what makes the top 10 list of a Google search of school boards gone wild. Too often, somebody gets on a school board and they see the world differently than most other people. And they have a very strong position that's different than what you or I or most other people see. If we don't allow that person to be heard and consider their perspective, problems will fester, they'll boil up, and they'll just pop out of the surface in all different ways. It's very important as a board that we provide space for conversations from people that are seeing the world differently than we do. That relates very closely to these other 2 of differences of values, because most human conflict is either a failure to meet someone's expectations or really fundamentally just a difference of values. A lot of this results in either miscommunication or just a failure to communicate. And the 4th thing I would add that's not on your slide is that violation of agreed or even expected norms. Depending on where you grew up and what your family of origin was like, you can have a much different expectation for how people will behave, whether people will interrupt someone else while they're speaking, even whether there's great eye contact or whether there's no eye contact. Those can be very much just subject to regional or family of origin differences. And we have to learn that, somebody's not weird or odd just because they're different than us. Maybe we're sometimes the weird or the odd one. Any thoughts on this topic of common challenges boards can have with working well with each other? Maybe not your board, but some other board you've heard about.
Well, one thing I was thinking about, it's Krista. I don't know if you can see who's speaking, Phil, but yeah, I was just thinking how this is what we hope our kids are learning. But as adults, we have to remember that we need to keep learning how to do this as well. So I appreciate that you brought this up, because it's not always easy for us to do, especially when we're under stress, which the past few years have been stressful for many of us.
And continue to be. I think that's such an important point, Krista. And I like to say, that really in the boardroom, we do need to be modeling the behavior that we want to see happen in the classroom. And it can be very difficult. That book, The Governance Core, it has a section where it talks about mind your manner. And, being aware when we're rolling our eyes or crossing our arms or fidgeting with a pen or looking at our phone every time, some person speaks, just being aware of how we're coming across. Zoom can help a lot with that. If you can see yourself on camera, then you get to see what other people are seeing. And sometimes that can be a little bit disturbing, if our expression, if we're deep in thought, but maybe we look angry, and so just being as self-aware. Am I giving out the message with what I say and what I do, my gestures and so forth? Is that consistent with what I really want? And what Krista just said, Is that the way I would want our children in our district to be behaving in a classroom? Well, I think this is important also, not only how the board works with each other, but how the board individually and collectively works with the superintendent. Now, on the next slide, I outlined a few things that I think are just really common challenges. Anytime there's a new superintendent, it can be vitally important to have this conversation with the superintendent as a board of what are our expectations. A lot of conflict comes because there is either unclear or unstated expectations. Again, if you're following policy governance with fidelity, the expectations are crystal clear. But if you get a little sloppy in how you handle policy governance, it might be the superintendent can be left, well, I don't know what this board wants. In fact, in my experience, that's probably more common than not for a superintendent to say, I really don't know what this board wants. And so, it behooves you as a team to have those conversations. Again, miscommunication or failure to communicate. Well, I thought you were going to, or I thought we agreed. Write things down. Have them in your policy, have them in your minutes. When there's something important and you've agreed to do something by a certain time, whatever it is, write things down. Because, a lot of times at lack of follow-up or follow-through, this is not necessarily on the superintendent end. A lot of times this is on the board end, where we might ask the superintendent for something. We might even ask for a report on something, but then sort of fail to circle back to it and get that clarity. I think there's also a relationship here to, again, the comments from the public and just, community concerns. If somebody has a concern, the board making sure there's that closing the loop together with the superintendent. A lot of conflict comes just from misunderstanding roles. Many of us, in fact, typically, people on serving on a school board have not been the executive of an organization or certainly something as complex as a school district. And it's easy for us to not understand a superintendent's role. It's also easy for a superintendent not to understand the appropriate role of the board. That's an ongoing conversation, right, that needs to happen. And that relates to that overstepping. School board members don't micromanage because they're bad people. We micromanage because we're curious, we're concerned, and sometimes we don't know what else to do, right? So we might ask a question or we might make a statement that comes across like micromanaging, sometimes because we just didn't know better or didn't understand our role. And sometimes because the board and superintendent team has gotten kind of loose in their conversations and in their work together, so that everybody is functioning in a good role. I think it's really important, I would say, for VSBA, we want strong boards to be in every school district and every supervisory union all across the state. We also need strong superintendents who fully understand the role of the board as well, so that things can keep moving in a smooth enough manner. Well, the next slide, common challenges with the community. The first one's a bit redundant, but a lot of times it's a failure to communicate or a miscommunication. Well, I thought someone else was going to do this, or I thought someone else was going to do that. Or what I heard was this, but what you heard was something different. So ensuring that we're all on the same page, using some good active listening skills. What I think you're saying, or what I understand you mean, help me understand. Do I have this right? Do I not have that right? Common challenge with the community is violation of open meetings law. And maybe your board doesn't have this problem, but I would say all across Vermont, there are way too many executive sessions, and so often not given for legal reasons or not even announced. States decided decades ago that the people have a right to know the people's business. And even though a board meeting is not a public meeting, it's not a meeting of the public, it's a meeting of the board that's held in public so that the public can be fully informed of the board's processes, the board's thinking, the board's planning. I would encourage you, not knowing any different, this is a very general, slide and presentation here. I would encourage you to be very thoughtful of when you go into executive session. Only go in for legal meetings and make it really clear for everyone concerned why you're going into that closed session. A mishandling of customer complaints. Now I'm going to tell you the most egregious example I ever saw. It was in a state capital, in a state far away from here. It was a board member newly elected who worked for a legislator and had a very passionate community service, public service persona. This guy just exuded, how can I solve your problem? A member of the public got up in front of the board, they stood and they gave their spiel, and they really were upset about something that had happened. This brand new board member left the dais, walked to the back of the room, handed the member of the public his own personal business card and said, be sure to call me and I'll make sure that your problem is solved. I just got to say, that is not good governance. That is not teamwork. That is grandstanding and individual, hero complex kind of stuff, right? People's concerns, especially if they're a customer, right? So they have a child or they are a student in the district. They have a student in the district from a family. The board jumping in to solve those problems in Mrs. Smith's third grade classroom is only going to cause heartburn and trouble for the community and the school system. So be really careful how you handle customer complaints. Hopefully you have clear policy on that. And in your new board orientations, you help new board members understand this is how we ensure that people's needs are met and problems are resolved. There are a lot of pitfalls of public comment. And I got to tell you, I've given testimony to state boards of education, to the legislatures. It is very unsatisfying to stand in front of a group of people, pour your heart out. You've got this concern, you've got this passion, and the only response you get is, thank you for your comment. Like, really? I don't know what the answer is sometimes, but I just know it's unsatisfying for the board. It's unsatisfying for the school system. It's very unsatisfying for the community members. Be intentional about your public comment. Have a sign in, have some means to follow up with people to ensure that somebody, the right person, has followed up with an email or a phone call, depending on what the issue is. I would encourage you to have a plan. The reality is, the law doesn't allow you to have a conversation about a topic that's not on your agenda. My boardroom was swarmed with people one day that were all upset because we were going to change the league that our sports teams were in. The board had never had a conversation about it, but the rumor mill had brought 30 to 40 people to the board meeting to tell us off. And as board chair, I had to say, folks, I know you're here because you've heard these things, and you just need to know the board is not having a conversation about that tonight. We don't have a conversation scheduled about that topic. We probably are never going to have a conversation on this. And so, keep your comments brief and let's get on with our meeting. The public can have all different kinds of rumors, concerns, questions, sometimes for a lack of information, and people will make up something when they don't have enough information. That public comment can be very tricky, and the board needs to validate, really listen to people's concerns. But also, I just encourage you to communicate in advance with the public. You're not going to solve their problem that night. You can't legally have a conversation about their concern unless it's already on your agenda. And figure out some ways to kind of close that loop. Maybe as a chair or leadership team, how will we close the loop? It's a real common challenge that boards have with the community. It's just a lack of engagement and a lack of involvement. It's hard to get people motivated and caring about routine matters. And sometimes, it is a flashpoint, a concern, an accusation, an incident that happens that gets people out to a board meeting. I would encourage you as a board to make this a challenge that you have together. How will you engage and involve your community in governance level decisions and conversations? Whether that's a town forum, whether that is listening sessions, whether it's surveys, coffee and chat type of opportunities. Where are those opportunities to really just engage people in a conversation, not to solve their problem, and not to act individually or as a small group like you're talking for the board, but just to really hear what does the public have to say, and how might your community be best engaged in your school system. A couple more slides just briefly here, and these are related thoughts, but tips for staying out of the news, right? How do you stay out of the news? How do board members individually and collectively, together with the superintendent and their staff, demonstrate respect and appreciation for all? How do you demonstrate respect sometimes, and not to be redundant overly so, but how do you demonstrate respect for people who believe totally differently than you do about something? Like, can you still listen to what they have and demonstrate respect? This is a human being, and maybe even sincere appreciation. This is not the way I look at this or I think about this, but I do appreciate that you have this concern and that you've brought it. And a lot of times this is, among the board, right? How does the board from in that sort of nucleus demonstrate respect for each other? And following agreements for who speaks for the board in particular. Typically it's the board chair or the designee of the board chair that speaks for the board, but being really careful. And I think new members, it's hard sometimes, the board's going to do this or the board's going to do that. And how do we transition from campaigning about how we're going to change things to actually being part of that team and effectively work together? Super important reality that as an individual, we have zero authority, no more authority than any other citizen in the community. It's only when we're seated together with the board in a duly warned meeting with a topic on the agenda to address that area of concern that the board as a whole has authority, and we get to have a slice of that, right? So being very careful about how we even give the impression that the board is going to do something or has a perspective when that's not what the board is going to do. I probably can't emphasize enough, be judicious with email, text, and in any kind of communication. I had a newspaper reporter one time accidentally send an email to me that he meant for his editor, and he was criticizing me in the email. And I just replied and said, this is just a reminder to all of us, never put anything in an email that you wouldn't want to have printed in the newspaper, because email has a way of going places, right? It gets forwarded. It can get even changed, misconstrued, and sent again. The law's quite concerned with the use of electronic media and what can become a walking quorum. So, just be careful in your use of email. If the board chair sends something out, hopefully all the board members are BCC'd so that nobody's accidentally replying all and giving the impression of an illegal meeting that's happening electronically. There are a few things you can do by email, like establish the time for when you can meet somewhere, but it's very limited. And I just be really cautious with both email and text. And if you're a new member and you haven't heard this before, by the way, if you use your personal device or your personal email for something board related, you open yourself up to public disclosure laws on all of the content that might be in your emails or texts virtually to anyone. And so it's really be extra careful as a board member, what you communicate, how you communicate. Avoid that urge to reply all or to copy a bunch of people on something. That's probably a conversation you need to have with someone rather than an email or a text where the emotions can fly too quickly. Ideas for staying out of the news: be intentional, be clear, be consistent, right? Think about individually and collectively, what is important to me? What do I really want to accomplish on the school board? What would I really like to see happen? And stay with that with a degree of flexibility and adaptability, because we can all learn and reflect and grow. That's something super important as a board member. I already said, we should be modeling the type of behavior that we would expect to happen in a classroom. That includes the professional practice of reflection, of thinking aloud. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Or I wonder if, right? And doing that individually, and then as a board, having those times of board self-assessment throughout the year where you say, I feel like, well, we did these things really well. And there's some other areas where I feel like we could improve. I think, that again, as we think about modeling, for the board to model the type of professional reflection that you hope that your students and your teachers are exercising is ideal. So having those conversations about how you're doing as a team, what you could do better, how to make your meetings more efficient or effective, how to maximize your professional development opportunities. I would just really encourage you to be intentional about those things. And that's all I had to share here this evening. I hope I didn't run over on time. And I'm happy if you had some questions or comments to entertain those, or just let you go on. I've got things to attend to, as I'm sure many of you do as well.
Thank you so much, Phil. This was really great. Even someone who's been on the board for, I think I'm going into my 8th year, really appreciated this. So thank you. Maybe we'll just move now, and unless anybody has any burning questions for Phil, we'll move now to our conversation with Jeannie Collins-Deweese. And Phil, if folks could reach back out to you with thoughts or questions in the future, if they come up, that would be great.
Thank you, Krista.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, Jeannie. Thank you for being with us and for hanging in for that first part. So we're really happy
for hanging in for that first part. Do people need to stretch?
We are super excited to have you here to talk with us tonight about how our work as a board that practices policy governance can consider the formation of committees, which is something that we've been talking about for a while. And we do tonight, as part of our reorganization, have committees that we've already established that we do need to get representatives for. And we have an action item to establish committees if it seems like we're moving in that direction after we hear from you. So we will just let you take it from here.
That's great. Patrick, did you give me sharing ability? Okay, great. I'll share in a second. So, hi, I am Jeannie Collins-Deweese. I just retired in June from down the road, where I was superintendent in the Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union for the past 8 years. And I'll speak about that journey as I talk about policy governance and committees. Prior to that, I was superintendent in the Burlington School District for 9 years, 41-year educator in the state of Vermont with a focus in special education. I'm sorry, I didn't do all 41 years in Vermont. I've actually been in 3 different states, but I did 27 years in Vermont with a focus on special education prior to administration. And I am thrilled and honored to be here with you tonight. While I was in Rutland Northeast, the Barstow board decided that it wanted to explore policy governance. And I was very thrilled and honored to be able to go with some board members to Atlanta, Georgia for 3 days and learn directly from Miriam Carver, one of the 2 founders, she and John Carver. And in addition, about a year or so later, Randolph School District brought Miriam back up for a day or 2, and I went with a few more school board members to that one. And then we've had a couple of expert consultants also come in the district. And I think you've had a couple of people attend a Saturday session with us at the Brandon Inn, or maybe it was Lilac Inn. It was one or the other on a Saturday or a Sunday. Anyway, it was on a weekend. So I've been pretty enmeshed in policy governance for most of the past 8 years, with the first couple learning and the last 6 trying to live it. And having worked both on a non-policy governance board and a policy governance board, I would say that it's night and day from the lens of a superintendent. I much prefer policy governance, and I don't care if it's policy governance or good governance, but I much prefer it when the board and the superintendent are really clear about whose responsibility it is to do what, and what exactly is requested of me as superintendent. Prior to that, I would experience board discussions around that really left me pretty confused. Like, is it my job or isn't it my job, for example, to interview, to do HHB, hazing, harassment, and bullying investigation, or any discipline investigation? Have all talked to all the witnesses, talked to the students involved, and come to a conclusion to bring a recommendation to the board? Or is it the board's job to listen to one person who comes to the board and tells one side of the story and make a determination? I mean, those, hours spent being fair and objective completely undermined in a matter of seconds. So I much prefer, the point of that is I much prefer policy governance. But tonight I'm here to talk about, it's not what I want. I'm here to talk about committees. And I don't want that one, but that's all right. We'll just skip it. So you can see a blank slide, right? Okay. So policy governance, as Phil said, is a model of governing that clearly defines the roles of the board and the superintendent through policy. Good governance exists when a board knows its roles and responsibility and lives within them. I just spoke to that. Committees, the basic question I was asked for tonight is, do committees have a role in policy governance? And my answer is yes. We did have committees, and committees did work well. And Miriam Carver also spoke to committees, but you have to be really clear about a number of different things. What makes a committee successful in any good governance model, and I'm going to talk about each one of these things, is each of these 7 characteristics. Particularly the first 2. Most importantly, the first 2 have to be in place. So let's talk about that for a second. What makes a committee successful? First and foremost, be really clear on your charge. What is the objective or the purpose of having the committee? And did you clearly articulate that objective with clear outcomes or deliverables? Without that, you start having mission creep, where the committee might start down the path of doing this, but then they heard about this and they're going to go to that direction, or they're going to bring in more information, or they kind of go off the reservation and ultimately come to the end of the time period and say, we really haven't accomplished anything, or we aren't really sure what we're supposed to do. So first and foremost, before you even set up a committee, as you're considering it as a board, you articulate the charge for that committee. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on too. Secondly, you're very clear about what authority the committee has. Does it make decisions, or does it make recommendations? Does the board recognize this authority? And that's why you want to be really clear. And is the board willing to keep informed through the minutes? Or what I have experienced in a board that was not great on committees, does the board want to revisit every decision and the work of the committee every single meeting? If you are using committees to be efficient, and you are clear about what a committee is going to work on and what authority it has, which usually is bringing back recommendations to the full board, then you need to trust that the committee is doing that work and that it's doing it. And it has done the research like I did in my investigations. And so then you're keeping informed through the minutes and you're ready to discuss the recommendation when it comes forward without having to relive everything. Okay. Also, think about how long you need a committee. Committees are not really permanent, forever in place committees. Boards change, people change on boards. Boards' goals change and their focus and priority changes. So the rule of thumb is identify how long is needed to do the work or how long it takes to get to the deliverables. But in any course, do not go beyond the term of the board who authorized the committee. That doesn't mean the committee doesn't continue. Say, for example, you want a committee on facilities and capital projects, and that takes longer than the year, which is what the board who's sitting tonight is serving. Then next March, this year's committee reports on their work and makes a recommendation on whether or not they should continue working, and next year's reorganization meeting reappoints the committee to continue working. But it's not assumed. I mean, it's recommended that you don't assume it continue. You really are intentional about the charge, the authority, and clear about the timeline and the deliverables in your committee. Who's on the committee? That should be discussed. Not only, not all committees are just board members. Sometimes boards want to invite citizens or students or staff to sit on committees. Be clear about who the membership is. Be also clear about appointing the membership actually by name. So it's not whoever drops in tonight. You can have a working committee that allows visitors to participate because committees are much smaller than boards and it's easier to be a little bit less formal. But ultimately, you want to be clear about the membership of that committee. Who is going to be on it? Who appoints them? Is it the board chair? Is it the board as a whole? And how are you considering members? A lot of times you want to keep in mind, how is it, what is the representation in the committee? Generally, there are more board members than citizens, but you also want to be careful not to have a quorum of your board. Otherwise, it's really the work of the board as a whole. So I already forgot how many board members you have, but if you have 11, then you want to make sure that it's 5 or fewer board members on a particular committee as opposed to 6, which kicks you over into a quorum. You might want to be concerned about, if you have citizens, are you pulling from different towns? Even with board members, between the whole makeup of the board, is it from a variety of towns or is it all from one community? And therefore you don't have really the voice of everybody. So you want to think about the membership and be very on that. Some of this can be decided by the committee itself. However, the logistics really should be talked about up front because people don't know if they want to join the committee if they don't have some idea of the commitment. Is it monthly? Is it weekly? Is it 2 hours, 4 hours, all day on Saturday? Where is it going to be held? These days, talk about whether it's going to be virtual, all in person, hybrid, like you're doing tonight. Having those logistics. Now, again, once you have a committee set up, they might want to choose the time of day and the location and whether virtual is an option or not. But you should have an idea of how long it's going to take you to get the work done. And so you know whether you need it to be monthly or bi-monthly or weekly, and how long it's going to be. So that should be able to be figured out in advance. The process. Who decides the committee leaders? Most of the committees that my boards have had, the committee itself chose its own chair. But possibly, I did, in Burlington, we had one committee, it was very large, and it had both board members and citizens on it, and the school board chair chose or appointed the chair of that committee who was a citizen. And she particularly wanted that person to be the chair and set it up that way. So you can do that. You can do it either way. Think about how decisions are going to be made. Robert's rules for small boards don't require a second motion. Small committees, or a second to the motion. Small committees don't necessarily need a second to the motion. Or is it regular Robert's rules? You do want to have some idea of the process. And that one might be left to the committee, but you could at least be thinking about it. And finally, be really clear about the role of administration in your committees. The administrative role is intended to support and not to lead a committee if it's a committee of the board. And by support, I mean that the administrative staff provides the information, supports the logistics, usually attends the committee meetings and listens in, but is not an active participant. Think through that role. If an administrator is actually leading the committee, then is it a committee of the board or is it the work of administration? So you want to think through that carefully as well. So just a reminder, you may not realize, but committees of the board, as designated as a committee by the board, do follow open meeting laws, which means that the committee must be warned, there must be minutes, there must be public comment allowed. Again, they have to have a process to do their work, such as Robert's rules, and generally speak, and they need to be chaired by a committee member, not an administrator. Again, you could choose it to be a board chair or a citizen chair. Set the committee charge for no more than 1 year at a time. There's no need for language like ad hoc or permanent. A committee has a charge. You don't need to call it ad hoc. You don't need to call it permanent. It's a committee. It's a committee with a charge and a timeline and all of those pieces in place. And then I strongly encourage you to evaluate the effectiveness of the committee at regular intervals. So for example, you might set a committee in Rutland Northeast, Otter Valley Board set a committee to look at whether or not the school district should consider building, consolidating schools and building a middle school. And there were board members and citizens both on that committee, and the business manager and I attended those meetings as support. We brought information around enrollment. We brought information around facility costs and legal issues, but the committee discussed it all. And the board set a timeline of 3 months for that work. At the end of the 3 months, the committee came back with a report and basically said, we're not done with our work, but we feel this is where we're going next. And so the board authorized them to continue for another interval of time. Ultimately, that committee came back to the board with 3 recommendations, and then it turned into a committee of the board for the next school year, where they chose to take the second meeting of every month and bring in members of the public to work on those 3 recommendations in small groups. And I'll talk about that in a moment as well. It's not changing there. What makes a committee structure ineffective? That mission creep, not being really clear about what it is that you're supposed to do. Doing the work of the superintendent or the administration, clarity of roles, once again. I always ask a lot of clarifying questions if I hear a desire, for example, to have a finance meeting, and is being really clear about what is the role of the superintendent and the business manager in that finance meeting, and what is the role of the board. You have hired, you are spending money on experts to build a budget, manage a budget, and bring forward recommendations to the board as to what the entire district needs, not just a particular subgroup, but an entire district. The board should be digging into those recommendations, but not necessarily repeating the same work and looking at every single line in a budget. You need to merge those 2 responsibilities. So a committee that does the work of the administrative staff is being ineffective in both how they're spending their money on hiring the experts, as well as how they're using their time. What also makes a committee structure ineffective is not honoring the authority of the committee. and having the full board basically redo the work of the committee, just like redoing the work of the administration. That's a waste of everybody's time. You need to honor, and if you were clear up front about the charge and the authority, it's a lot easier to be clear then about how you are considering recommendations that's coming from that committee. So for example, you might most boards set a negotiating committee, and usually that consists of board members. Otter Valley actually had a citizen usually on their negotiations committee, former board members actually who enjoyed the work, but usually it's boards. And that committee had been spending a year, once a month or every 2 weeks, meeting with the negotiations committee of the association, and ultimately bringing recommendations back to the full board. For the full board to then, certainly there are clarifying questions, or there might be some decisions to be made at the full board level, but to not, if the full board does not recognize the work of that committee, it actually ends up undermining the trust with the association, with the union, and does a great deal of harm in the future, because the people sitting at the table thought they were sitting with the designated people of the board. And so for the full board to undo that work, again, causes a great deal of mistrust. And again, lack of a clear charge and authority would make a committee structure ineffective. So as I mentioned earlier, if you're not doing committees, how else could you do the work of the board efficiently when you're getting into those high-level discussions like capital planning and keeping on top of your policies and things like that? Some boards, the two primary areas that I know of is the board work groups during one meeting in the month. Again, Otter Valley had 2 meetings a month, and they chose to designate one for an entire year of studying into the capital projects as a board of the whole. And they actually invited community members into those discussions. The other way I've seen Barstow do, where they actually build the topic into their agenda, and for half an hour, 45 minutes of each one of their monthly meetings, they talked about a particular topic. For example, last year they talked a lot about private school tuition, and they had those meetings in the board of the whole as part of their agenda. And they planned the agenda. They knew it was going to take 45 minutes each agenda meeting. Final comment here: successful committees are not accidental, whether you're in policy governance or good governance. They are intentional with a clear charge. They do the work of the board, and they have deliverables within a certain time frame. I'd like to pause, and I had shared a document with Patrick that, if you could pass that out, Patrick, that maybe people could follow along. And I think, Krista, you were hoping to have some questions about what I was saying, and having some conversation with your board about whether or not you see a role for committees on the board. Would you like to do that now? Is this a good time?
Yes. Just back to the worksheet you mentioned, we're all virtual because of the weather. So I don't know how.
I can share what
maybe you can put it up on your screen and we can
yes
look at it that way. And then, yes, I thought what could be helpful is if we could, as a board, maybe chew on some of those questions together, so that we can see how we can move forward tonight.
Give me just 1 second.
Sure.
I just closed it, of course. While I'm looking for it, can I take just a minute to address the questions I was asked to address during your public comment?
Sure.
Here it is. Okay. 2 things. I think that Phil did a great job of addressing the question of why the board doesn't answer questions during public comment. And, the words that he said, the board holds a meeting in public, not a meeting of the public. And that your agenda dictates what's going to be discussed that night, because you need to warn it. You need to give notice so that the right people or the interested parties can be present. And believe it or not, while your administration is absolutely phenomenal, the superintendent does not hold absolutely everything in their own head, and they might be the only person there, and they need to get the information so that you're not wasting your time. I know, Patrick, that's not you. You hold it all in your head, but many superintendents do not. And that's because, again, you hire a team. You hire a superintendent. The superintendent hires people with expertise to help him do the charge that you've given him. So to have a discussion on a topic that the board isn't ready to have a discussion on, the administration isn't ready to have a discussion on, and that the community has not been warned on, given notice that's going to happen, is actually pretty unfair, not just illegal, but unfair. Whereas if it's a topic that the board would like a discussion on, you can build it into a future agenda and then have that discussion then. Meanwhile, I do agree with what he said as well. You get back to, with questions, you determine who's going to get back to the person, whether it's the superintendent, depends on what the question is. Could be curriculum director, could be finance director, could be board chair, who's going to get back to the person with the information that they requested. The other question that came up is, why does policy governance use the term owners? Miriam Carver describes it that policy governance really works across a variety of corporations, not just nonprofits like school boards, but also for-profit corporations like banks and businesses. So one of the first things you're supposed to do when you're setting up your policy is define who your owners are. And in a school district, your owners are taxpayers, parents, students, residents of your towns. You have that discussion and define what ownership means in your context. So the policy governance general term of owners is modified for individual contexts. So those two things are done. Any questions on those? Okay. Let me share. Okay, this is the worksheet, and Patrick can email it out to you as well. This is the worksheet that this is the worksheet that I recommend that you go through if you're actually going to set up a committee. So I don't know that you'll necessarily, we can work through this tonight, but I think we had some additional questions first that we wanted to talk about. So let me go back to the PowerPoint. Didn't open the PowerPoint. It opened the same one. There we go. How's the nor'easter going? Did you get the snow? Is it coming?
It took its time and now it's here full on.
Just before this meeting, my daughter called me. She's 21 and working at a school in the Burlington area. And she wanted to know if the snow could have caused a flat tire. No, and stop driving.
Yes.
Okay. It's never immediate. Sorry about this.
That's okay.
Oh, this is the one I want. Okay. So review just this one. Okay.
Great.
So we can maybe co-facilitate, Krista?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know what others think, but I had an idea of how we might do this. So I guess first, maybe we can just open it up for a conversation, based on what we all heard from Jeannie. And thank you. That was a really great presentation and super helpful. Just that first question, do we see that there's a role for committees on this board? And if so, which committees might we consider? And then I wondered for the specific questions that you put on that worksheet, Jeannie, I had the idea that maybe if we determine, yes, we're ready to form some new committees, that could be the work of their very first meeting. That
Of the very first committee meeting,
correct.
except that
And
if
they
you're
wouldn't
going
be
to have
officially
committees-
formed yet, but
Right.
that we'd say, if we have this committee, who's interested, and if we determine
see.
when those committees would meet, that the very first time those folks got together would be to try to answer some of those questions.
You could do that, but again, I would say that you need to the board as a whole should decide the charge of the committee. You don't want the committee to decide their own charge. Why?
Right.
And that might be really question number 2. What committee should we consider and why? If you have that conversation tonight, you should be able to finish the first box. And I think the board as a whole also needs to understand what authority that committee has. But then it could then decide that the committee determines who their membership is. It may be that you decide as a board that you as chair collect interest in the different committees, you appoint board members to the committees, and then those committees meet and decide, do we need to add to our group? Do we need to bring in citizens? Do we need to bring in staff? Do we need to expand our membership? And they could do that. But I would not recommend leaving the development of the charge to the committee, because if the board feels the committee is important, then the board needs to understand why and define it and define the charge first.
One thing that we've done, and then I'll stop talking so we can open this up to the group. But one thing we've done is had folks write a draft charge and then bring it to the board to discuss and
I see.
Right. So I was imagining that could work as well, just in terms of what we can manage to get through tonight.
Right.
But
Sure.
let's see how we do maybe with
and
working through the
I might
conversation.
just have a couple of questions for you as you answer these questions that can help your committees do that.
Mhm.
Do you want me to continue sharing, or do you want to see each other's faces?
Let's see each other's faces, and maybe
I can
just
come
be
back to
reminded.
it.
Yeah, so that first question is pretty broad.
Yeah. Do you see a role of committees for this board?
So what do folks think? Steve?
So this is, I'm guessing, a question about committees that are outside of the ones that we already have that we need to fill tonight.
Well, one of the things I heard Jean say, which I took note of, was that we should build in a structure where we evaluate all of our committees regularly. So based on that, I would say we should think of this as the whole. So right now we have the Community Engagement Committee, and then we have a negotiations committee that's going to be needed for this period in time. So those are 2 that we already have, but I think it can be a conversation about all.
So one other group that seems to be out there, and this might have been formed while I was gone, is a work group on facilities, which I think, Patrick, you put together. And that committee, I sort of was scratching my head how it got started and who sort of put that together. Was that something the board sort of agreed that Patrick would run?
Right. So Patrick suggested that this be a working group of the superintendent, which allowed some flexibility and opportunity to move forward on a specific topic, and board members would be invited to participate as well as community members and administrators, but that it's not a committee of the board.
Okay.
Patrick, do you want to add anything to that as far as why we suggested that, or we agreed with that approach?
No, I think in part it was knowing that there was more work to be done and conversations to be had around committees that enabled us to get something moving a little bit more swiftly around a topic that if the budget passed, we were going to be needing to get to work on. And I would just add that it doesn't preclude the board from having a facilities committee that may sort of, it could absorb that work group. We could talk about if it made sense to work in parallel to the work group. My sense is probably not. But that was sort of the impetus of that.
Okay. Yeah, I was probably out when that conversation happened, and my only concern with it was just that we might end up running afoul of that administration versus board dynamic that I think we sort of butted up against in the past. That it was very clear about whose committee this was, and so it sounds like you guys have had that discussion. I don't particularly see a need to revisit it if it's been discussed and the board has moved forward with it. I just want to be clear about it.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, so we've got a bunch of other folks' hands
Yeah.
raised up. Did you have anything to add specific to whether, based on that, I think it's a good idea for us to form committees?
Well, certainly. I mean, and the policy governance committee is the one I think we've talked about the most. There is a draft charge on the table that hasn't been widely distributed, but I think that's ready to go out for people, maybe not at this meeting, but maybe at a subsequent meeting. But I think it's ready for distribution and comment.
Okay, great. I think I saw Sarah and then Liz and then Brad. So Sarah.
As far as one of our goals being a little bit more efficiency and a little bit of more ownership on some topics in depth, I think it would be helpful to consider committees. And I know I like the worksheet and filling all of that out. So I think we need to maybe consider doing a worksheet for every type of committee we can think of and really try to then fine tune which are really essential that we have the capacity for, and also what, would help us shorten up some of our meeting time so that we are more efficient, that they're actually serving a purpose.
Great, thank you. Liz?
Yeah, I like the idea about doing the worksheet for each of the other committees. That's a good idea, Sarah. And yes, I support the Community Engagement Committee continuing. It does some good work with the newspaper article. I do see how a lot of the things that you said could happen in terms of kind of shifting a little bit off. So, and we certainly need our negotiations committee. I like that the board was invited, members were invited to join the facilities work group, because that kind of feels like when there's a hiring situation and we get invited in to participate in the hiring of a principal, it feels a lot like that to me. And I almost wonder if something isn't quite at the level of being a committee, that I am fond of the idea of having it be during a part of a meeting and then kind of making it a community come into the discussion, right? Like if we were doing one for the financials, maybe I'd like to understand better how that works. And I think one thing that I've struggled with a lot is that we've had this, I think the longest standing committee conversation that we've had is the idea of, well, at least for me, it's been toggling back and forth whether we're looking at school-based committees, right? Like a committee that's kind of focused on each school, or whether it's topic-based committees, right? So, and I've leaned towards topic-based, like facilities, but in a way, a school is its own topic, but then that's really tricky in terms of how does that really function? And what is its purpose? How does it support board work? Is that work of the board, or is that something that falls under one of the other realms? Like if a principal would feel that was supportive, something, I don't know. But I'd say that's something that it's been, as long as I've been on the board, that's been a thing about whether there were school-based or topic-based committees. So I wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Liz, is that a question for Jean?
Yes, sorry, Jean, thank you.
Do you want to go ahead and
Sure.
dive in, and then we'll come back to Brad and then Steve?
Sure. I struggle from my experience with the idea of school-based committees being the work of the board. Because RDSU also went through a merger, and the Outer Valley Board serves 6 towns. The Barstow Board serves 2 towns. And we worked really hard after the merger to bring the board and the communities to understand that they are now one district. And if the board is focused on different individual schools, like you have a committee for every individual school, then you're not coming together for one district, and yet you have to function as such because every taxpayer is paying for improvements, across the whole district. And you do have PTOs who can do that work. Whereas if the board is focused on a topic, such as facilities across the Mount Abe Unified Union School District, then you're looking at the needs of all the schools, prioritizing constantly, that's never static, and making decisions based on everyone's needs. So my recommendation is to stay topic oriented.
And I'm sorry to jump in, but Liz, were you kind of thinking about advisory councils? Was that where that came from?
Yes, because we talked about, yeah.
I think advisory councils are a slightly different animal. The state even recommends in their governance model that you can consider advisory councils, but that's really a school-based group to talk about sort of internal means at an administrative level. And not that the board would form those committees. I think we even talked about advisory councils maybe being organically formed, like if they wanted to form them, they could, as opposed to doing what I think your other option that you and Jeannie are talking about, the topic based, which is really district wide.
Thanks, Steve. Brad.
Hi, sorry, it took me a minute to get to the unmute button. I just wanted to, confirm my understanding with what, about the facilities committee and what Patrick said. That was also my understanding, that the working group was for more short-term, more immediate, more pressing needs, but it didn't preclude the notion that we would move forward with having a regular facilities committee. So I just want to say that. Second, I think that in addition to what Steve was talking about for the governance committee, I think we've also been talking about a finance committee that would help inform the board on the budgetary issues. And so I'd advocate for having a finance committee. And then the last thing is, I agree with Sarah that I hope that as we set up the committee structure, we can really think pretty critically about, how do we sort of maximize our effectiveness, and at the same time being, maybe a little bit more, sort of careful about how much, how much time we spend in all these meetings. So those are just my initial thoughts.
Thank you. I see your hand up, Steve. I'm just wondering if anybody else has thoughts to share. I'd love to hear what other board members think. Kevin?
I'm too lazy to put my thumb up, but I guess I'm kind of thinking I understand the worksheet that Jeannie's talking about, and it certainly makes a lot of sense. I kind of struggle with how we as a board could effectively do that in a timely manner, unless we pre-assign it, I guess, which doesn't sound ideal, but and so I guess I've heard, and I was a little bit lost because we've talked about some of these committees before, and it's kind of like trying to remember them all in my head, but we talked about a policy, governance, finance, facilities, continuing the CEC and the negotiation committees. I guess I'm okay with that, particularly with a clear goal and restraint, if you will. Finance committee, to me, has always been a little troublesome without a clear goal of being dragged in or being forged onward into the weeds, if you will. But I guess so. I could go either way with any of those. And I don't know. I'm not hearing anything else. I guess that's what our boundaries are right now. Is what we were thinking about.
Couple of folks we still haven't heard from.
My virtual hand is up in my head. If that works.
I can feel it. I can feel it.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm, obviously still learning the ropes, but I'm definitely in favor of forging, moving forward with these committees as well. I think it would be helpful. As Sarah had said, especially with time management. I'm not really sure, what else I can offer up, just, my support in doing this.
Thank you. Okay, Steve, and then Brad, I see your hand up. I don't know if it was from before or not, but Steve, why don't you go ahead?
So one suggestion might be to just take a straw poll about who's willing to serve on these committees. And that way you might have somebody you could appoint to draft a charge out of that, out of the group that you find might want to participate. I think on the financial committee end, it is a tricky line to draw between diving into the weeds and duplicating or just, muddling in that work. But I think from the past meetings, the issue has basically been that a lot of the stuff is very complicated, and having a few people who have a really good understanding of it and able to sort of come to the board and say, we've looked at this in more depth, sort of relieves some of the board's anxiety over not really everybody having the ability to understand complex spreadsheets or financial issues. I think that may be more of an educational and a more fiduciary, might be fulfilling our fiduciary role better than just sort of throwing these documents out in front of the broad group and expecting everybody to understand them. I know that's the way a lot of other boards work. My last comment was back to the facilities work group. I don't necessarily think it's necessary to reformulate it into a board work committee, although if the board wants to do that, that's fine. The one concern I have is that if it was a committee of the board and it's a facilities group of the board, then it's a public meeting. And then then there are minutes, there's transparency. And I would just suggest, if we're going to run with the administrative work group, that we might want to live by those rules a little bit. We might want to, publish when the work group's going to happen, have formal minutes, just so that, everybody can follow along and be able to participate if they want to. I think that's the beauty of having it be a board committee, is that there's a full ability of the public to sort of participate.
Bailey? Can't hear you, Bailey. Still can't hear you, friend. We'll come back to you. I know that internet can be dicey, especially tonight. So I'm going to just pause for a minute and maybe recap what I heard. And I also jotted some things down that might be helpful as we figure out what to do next. So first off, what I think our count right now, if we include the facilities working group and the notion of a pre-K work group, which we've also talked about, and I think when we talked about it, I think we talked about having board representation on that. That brings us up to 6 groups. So Community Engagement Committee, Negotiations, Policy Committee, Finance Committee, Facilities Working Group, Pre-K Working Group. And when we're at full strength, that's 13 members. And so that would be 2 people, and so 2 people on each committee, with one having 3. So, it seems to me like one thing we need to decide is if we're assuming that everybody who serves on the board will also serve on a committee. And then we also have 2 positions that we need representation for, which is, it's not a committee membership, but it's a representative. And one is for the Hannaford Career Center, and the other is for Community Council. So I just want to bring that up. And then I also heard a couple of different ideas of how we could proceed. One is to work together on, and maybe this could be at our first meeting of the month, our first meeting of April, which I think is the 4th, that we could spend that time working together through the worksheet for every potential committee and then prioritize them. Another idea I heard was to see, based on those, who might be willing to join those different groups, work together to come up with a draft charge, and then bring that back to the full board again at that first meeting in April. So knowing all of that, what ideas do people have for how to proceed? Brad, I see the thumb, which is awesome, but can you tell me which, what you're thumbing? All of it, none of it, everything?
Yeah, Krista, I thought you outlined that pretty well. I mean, I really like the idea of trying to identify at some point prospective members of these committees, or people who might be more interested in one committee over another, and having them kind of take the first cut at what the charge might be. So there's some ownership and buy-in from the actual committee members. But then, of course, have the whole board, ratify, the charge as Jean was pointing out. So I think that's a really good way to go. As far as the, it is an impressive list of committees and responsibilities, and as you point out, we're only 13. I don't know. Maybe one idea would be to kind of hold in abeyance the facilities committee, especially if we're having a facilities working group to address immediate needs. So that might be one idea if we want to reduce the number of committees that we're sort of embracing right now.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, the only thing, thanks, Brad. The only thing about that is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, but I think that the hope was to have several board members participate in that. So I think it's sort of is the same thing, even as far as responsibility or
Yeah,
expectation of participation.
I think we're hoping for at least 2.
Kevin?
I guess, and I think Brad sort of said it, whether we come together in April to work on them as a group, or if we have some people work on them for April. I don't think we want to go into April to work on them as a group without at least a draft. So if we do the group thing April, as opposed to different individuals who might be prospective committee members preparing things, somebody, I don't know who, needs to come up with some drafts for these things. So I don't know, all of a sudden the chair might be taking on a lot of work, or the chair may be assigning different people to draft one anyway. So I really don't, I guess my caution is we don't come into April with a blank slate and try to define the world at that meeting.
Steve?
Yeah, so I mean, I can get the ball rolling. As I said, the policy governance charge has been drafted. I actually have done quite a bit of homework on it. So I think Krista, I think you've seen a copy of it. I know Don had a copy of it. And I think that could go around to folks even ahead of the meeting to look at before we even got to the meeting. Whether there's other people that would be willing to serve on that committee is another question, but there's a lot of work that's been done on it already. As far as the other committees are concerned, I think keeping the facilities committee out of the board stream is fine, as long as we can tell what's going on, the public can tell what's going on, that sort of thing. So as far as policy and governance is concerned, I think there's a lot of homework that's been done already.
Aaron, I'm going to put you on the spot as our new vice chair. What thoughts do you have that you might be willing to share?
I really liked Steve's idea of just taking a straw poll of who might be interested, because if we are all sitting here and nobody's interested in doing any of this, then that doesn't help at all. So are people, I mean, maybe we could do thumbs, Krista, about people who are interested, and we'll just go through each thing. And then if we have 1 or 2 people who are, then that would be great. But if people don't thumb an idea at all, then we might just say, okay, then that can just be baked into our regular board group or our board work.
Okay, let's put a pin in that idea for a second. Sarah?
I just want to come back to I'm more interested if it's in a time that's carved out that we already have. So I don't mean to go back to that, but I have 0 other moments in my life besides these 2 meetings. And I can't do it. So unless we can find a way to carve it in to the meeting that we're having right now, like we're doing right now, I think committees are not going to be that effective. So throw that
Yeah,
out.
I think that's great. I'm glad no apologies for that. And I wonder if we might actually straw poll with that first, just how we're expecting when those meetings, we would be expecting them to be held. I think your proposal originally, Sarah, last time we met was to have committees meet the first meeting of the month, and then the second meeting of the month would be the full board. So we have
Even
2
part of
straw
it.
poll. Sorry.
Even part of the meeting, like even if it's
Yeah.
like this is a really carved out agenda that's an hour or an hour and a half, that's what that committee does, or wherever it takes, but it's around then by a certain time that evening.
Okay. Steve and then Brad.
Actually, go ahead, Brad. You had your hand up first.
Yeah, again, I agree with Sarah's sentiment. I worry a little bit if the committee meetings are so structured that they're going to happen like either the first Tuesday or the last Tuesday, that we might be shoehorning, sort of committee priorities into, these very regular board meetings. I know at one point last year when we were talking about committees, and maybe this was overly idealistic, but we were thinking about having, maybe reducing the number of meetings of the board as a whole to 1, and then having the second meeting be be warned and scheduled and warned at a time that in that month when it made sense for the committee. So I kind of wonder whether we want to have the committee meetings, assuming we have the committees, so structured that it's almost like it might not be responsive to the committee needs, and maybe a good idea to have the scheduling of the committee meetings decided by the committees themselves.
Thank you. Okay. And Steve.
Yeah, those are both good points. Having it be part of a second meeting or a first meeting would mean that, depending if we still have a lot of board work to do and we still need a second board meeting, regardless of the committees, then I would agree that splitting the second or first meeting up into a full board meeting and then breaking into committees would meet the goal of a lot of people who have other time constraints. On the other hand, if we think we can narrow down to a single full board meeting, then I agree with Brad, because then, each of these committees could sort of set things up to occur whenever. And the other problem is if we say we're going to take the second half of the second meeting to do committee work, and we have a couple of people on several committees, then that's difficult to execute. The last thing is we're 4 people short. And right now that's kind of a tough thing to figure out, how we fill all these committees and we're a quarter of the board isn't here. So it might be that we have to be flexible about how we start this, and maybe we have to adjust it as we go along to make it work for everybody.
Okay, I think in the interest of time, what if we do this? Let's strive for the goal of not having more than 2 board commitments a month, a standing board meeting and a committee work meeting. And knowing that that's what we're striving for, let's take Erin's suggestion and go through our list and see who might want to do what. And then we'll see where we are. So the first committee is the Community Engagement Committee. So if you're interested in serving on that, you can put up your little digital hand or your regular hand, and I'll just add my hand to that one. So Bailey, Liz, Krista. Okay. Okay, and then we have negotiations. Now this one, usually, Steve, is that your hand up for negotiations? You're just so excited you threw that hand up before I could even stop talking.
Well, I had a question about negotiations, actually.
Yeah, I think
are we in a negotiations year?
Yeah, I think we are just negotiating for staff.
Support staff.
Support
Yep.
staff, not for teachers.
Okay.
So that's great because we don't have 2 separate groups going. And I think we want at least 2 people to be on that group.
And that will probably start in the fall.
Okay. All right. So,
So yes, my hand is up.
okay. So it'd be great to have at least, and then Erin. Great. Okay. Then we have the policy committee, and I want to pause here also because when we were talking with Jeannie about this committee in particular, I was saying the policy governance committee, and she was saying, wait a minute, policy governance committee? Or is this a committee looking at policies, or is this a committee for board governance? So Jeannie, can you just take a minute to share what your thoughts were when you first heard me call it that? And then maybe we want to just review that as a group.
Sure, I'd be happy to. It was a good example for me of being unclear about the charge. Policy governance policies, you have already written because you've adopted policy governance. And so you have a policy governance manual. And those generally are tweaked when your superintendent, most of the time, when the superintendent brings a monitoring report forward and you really delve into the policy and does it say what we think it should say or does it need to be changed? Sometimes there is another external reason to revisit them, but they're pretty well set. Whereas there are many other policies outside of policy governance set of policies that are federally mandated or state mandated or sometimes even locally requested. You just feel strongly about having a local policy on this. For example, class size is a state mandated policy, I think. Animal dissection, I know, is a state mandated policy. Travel and mileage is actually a federally mandated policy. So there are a number. And a policy committee where I've used that, where they need to be reviewed. Rule of thumb is every 3 years. There's no law to that. It's just they need to be reviewed periodically. And they also change because of legislation that happens. And so then you need to review them. So a board committee that works with the superintendent managing all of those policies, I absolutely could understand that. I didn't understand what a policy governance committee charge was. I just didn't, I didn't know how that was different.
Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, I might suggest, I think maybe, calling it a policy governance committee might be confusing. I can see why that is the case. So perhaps it could be called sort of governance and policies.
Well, it's actually called policy and governance committee.
Oh, okay. Or policies and
it's policy and governance.
Okay, but I want to make sure
I could actually send the thing around if we wanted to get into even more. But
all right,
it had to do a lot to do with housekeeping for for instance, we don't have a policy on how we create policies.
Right.
The VSBA has a whole list of policies, and some of them are mandated, some of them are recommended, and there's nobody going through them to sort of check and see if we should be adopting any of these or if we should be tweaking the ones we have based upon their model version. There's our policies were adopted 4, 5, 6 years ago. I'm forgetting how long ago now, and they probably all need to be gone through with some lens. When we monitor our policies, I know that we don't typically go through the language in the policy. We typically go through what's been reported on the monitoring. And if there are tweaks to be made to the language in the policy that somebody wants to bring up, I don't think in the way that we execute our monitoring reports that we are taking that opportunity to do the tweaking in the meeting. I think in order to change the policy, I think there's homework to be done by somebody to make suggestions on what those changes should be to be brought back to the board for modification. On the Career Center board, there is a policy and governance committee that does exactly that. They look at what the state is recommending. They're a little newer board. They've just gotten into policy governance, so they're sort of creating some of the stuff as they're going along. But it's basically just policy and governance maintenance.
Yeah, I mean, Steve, my sense, as we've been talking about this over the last year or so, is that a governance committee would sort of have some, their interest would be in establishing and monitoring sort of the roles and the responsibilities of the various actors, whether they be board members, community members, administration staff, and that sort of thing. And to the extent that policies fit into sort of the governance structure, then they would be perhaps considered by a governance committee. Do I get that? Do I have that wrong?
Well, it wouldn't. I'd have to go back and review the charge. I don't know if it was outside of the committee's charge to look at governance in general. Like, do we want to examine different models of governance? Mm-hmm. Certainly, if the governance committee thought there was something to be gained by tweaking our governance model, that could be brought as a recommendation to the board. But I don't know if that was one of the forefronts of the charge list. I'd have to go back and crack it open.
Yeah.
I know the one other thing that I think people were interested in on the governance policy and governance side was having a group that could really look at our ends policy in more depth and bring recommendations about maybe creating some more measurable metrics for determining compliance or non-compliance that are a little bit more grounded than the vast overstatement that we make in our general ends policy. I think that was one of the other charges that was listed.
Well, and that would be more at the 30,000 foot level, which is, I think, what we're talking about, as opposed to having sort of getting into the weeds of state mandated policies.
So I'm going to interrupt because I think this is an awesome conversation, and I think you both sound so interested that I'm wondering if perhaps you might be some of the folks that would like to raise your hand for this group. I know Steve said yes.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I basically, I think my interest would either be the governance /policy and governance committee or the finance committee. So I'd be interested in either of those.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to delve deeper into this conversation about what the committee would be and also think about this work more? Sarah? Great.
I just want to offer out that I too would be either interested in the financial one or the policy one.
Okay.
So, policy and governance.
There's no limit to the number of committee. Well, actually, there might be a logistical limit.
Let's just start with keeping a couple of things simple and having them. That's the other thing. I think if they establish some, rhythm, then it might be easier to to know how to walk in from one into the other, or I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that was Jeannie's point. You got to kind of know what you're walking into, before you agree to do it. And I'm seeing a giant plate of stuff I'm jumping into here, and I want to be sure I've got time to do it too. So
Yeah. Okay, so then moving to the finance committee, Brad and Sarah expressed some interest. Anyone else interested in that work? Okay. We can always come back if you, oh, I see Kevin.
If we're, how was this supposed to go? We're supposed to be looking as individuals for how many committees? 1 or 2?
I mean, right now, I think the expectation would be that every board member would serve on one. We don't have enough people for all of the committees at this time, but we hope to change that soon.
Mm-hmm. So depending on,
we can only do what we can do as well.
Right. I'm lukewarm about it, I guess.
Okay, you don't, there's still another Kevin. So the next one is the facilities working group. Does that one jump at you a little more?
Yeah, I'm okay with that one.
Okay.
There are probably other people that aren't, but
I'll throw my hat into that ring for now.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Kristen? Okay.
Sure.
Okay, and then this hasn't been formed yet, but we have talked about a pre-K working group. Patrick, do you want to, is that something that we should gauge interest on now? Because I believe we talked about this being a superintendent working group. Or did we determine that? I don't know if we determined that.
I have to go back and look at the minutes. There's a lot of conversation about it. I'm trying to remember exactly where it landed, but my recollection was that I think we talked about coming back to the board for sort of an informational session about it. And from there, we would decide next steps and work groups or committee. So I think we're one step away probably from a decision on where to go with that.
And when you say information, oh, sorry, go ahead, Katrina.
We have our universal pre-K coordinator kind of waiting in the wings to come and give some sort of a, universal pre-K education to the board in terms of what's happening and how the funding works now and what our programming is looking like, and also what the bill that may or may not get any legs is talking about for you mid-April. So I thought I remembered that we were going to wait for a little more information from that incredible resource before we decided what we wanted to do next.
Thank you. Brad?
Yeah, I think, Katrina's right about that. I think, as I remember, we kind of decided that this working group on the pre-K was a huge undertaking with stakeholders from all around, from sort of the Kevin zoning and type people, the state actors, the federal actors, and I think I think you expressed it actually, Krista, that what would be useful is to figure out how we as a board can play a useful role and what that role might be. So I would think it would be way premature to sort of think about formalizing a group until we have a better sense of where it might take us.
Thank you. Liz?
So do we, so negotiations won't meet during a school board meeting time slot anyway, right? Theoretically.
Correct.
Right. And so the community engagement committee, if we decided to also hold that at the same time as the policy and finance committees, then I would prioritize community engagement, which I think is something worth thinking about. And then, but if they were not at the same time, I am interested in the policy governance, and then that would help us give a shift to have 2 people for each one. That would be my second one if they were running at the same time.
Okay. Great, thank you. Kristen?
Yeah, kind of going off of what Liz was saying, my second choice would be the Community Engagement Committee.
Okay. Great. So I'm wondering if, like, I know for the Community Engagement Committee, we're going to meet next Tuesday. We, luckily enough, have our charge, but there are definitely some of these questions that we might want to revisit that Jeannie mentioned that I don't know if we've articulated in a while. But I'm wondering, do folks think it is reasonable for you to find time between now and the April 4th meeting to convene your groups to have a conversation and work through these worksheet questions so that we come on April 4th with the opportunity to hear from the different groups of folks about what they're recommending. And then once we hear that, we might be able to determine whether or not we would prioritize one committee over another, and also how to schedule them if it looks like we need to run some concurrently. So does that make sense, Steve?
One thing to add to that is I was able to find a draft charge for policy and governance that I used as a starting point. However, I haven't had good luck finding example charges for these other ones. And so if somebody had a resource or sample charges for some of the other committees, not you have to follow them, but it gives you just an outline to kind of work through along with Jeannie's questionnaire to building them.
I can try to see if I can pull up a couple samples for you if you'd like, Krista.
That would be great. Thank you.
It'll be a couple days, but I'll do it this week.
Thank you. Kevin?
As far as preparation, I would suggest that we have these done so that they could be put into the packet for the next meeting distribution, not brought to the meeting, whatever that time frame needs to be.
Yeah. So Patrick, can you just confirm for me? I think it's the case that our next board, well, we're meeting on the 28th, but then we would be meeting again. Oh, it's not until the 11th. I kept saying April 4th, but it's not until April 11th. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks away. So that gives a lot of time for folks to get together and have their materials in.
I have the 4th on my calendar, but I could be wrong.
Is that right, Patrick?
Yes, April 4th and 18th are the two that are on the work plan.
Oh, okay. So we are meeting back to back, the 28th and then the 4th. Okay. All right. So it's 3 weeks away. So, yeah, ideally, if folks could get together with their groups in time to share back out before the meeting.
Yeah. So my comment is that we need to cut that time frame down by a week or something so that that information can be put together with the packet for the, or maybe it's like 4.5 days instead of 7. I don't know. But.
Well, the information goes out. I mean, Jennifer tries to send the agendas and associated materials usually on like the Thursday of the week before. So that would be the 30th. And I think that should be enough time for the rest, for the board to see it and look at it. What do people think? Sarah?
Is there a way to carve out 30 minutes in that 28th meeting? To do it
That was my
into
question. That
small
was my
groups
question as well.
right then and there and get it done and hand it in for people to then look at the board.
I don't know if our 28th meeting agenda is so packed we can't squeeze that in or not. But
I can't get to it easily, but I'm guessing it's packed, but also we could just commit to doing that, if that makes the most sense, and try to be as expedient with the meeting as we can. If we're all together anyway, then, if that's folks' preference rather than trying to find another time to get together.
I do have the
Brad?
work plan up if it's helpful to let you know what's on there.
Yeah.
Just let
Why
me
don't you
know.
go ahead?
So for the March 28th, there are two executive limitations monitoring reports, 2.7 compensation and benefits, 2.8 communication support to the board. Then in board management and governance, there's a monitoring report for 3.3 delegation of the superintendent that Liz is doing. That's when you would authorize the superintendent to make hiring commitments. On the agenda right now is to approve updates to articles of agreement that reflect Lincoln's withdrawal. Adopting a policy on admission of non-resident tuition students that you've seen once already. And there was a topic of discussion, I think, superintendent evaluation process. A couple of the typical updates, although one is more of a probably discussion / update item, which is some pros and cons of the list of possible locations for central office. There was going to be an executive session for superintendent check-in. And I think that's the meat of the meeting.
I
And
think
then maybe
I was-
going over parking lot items to be added to the agenda, future agendas. So
Yes.
prioritizing our work. Okay. So it's doable, I think.
Krista?
Yes, Brad.
Yeah, I mean, I might be confused here. Are we talking about actually drafting something on the 28th?
Well,
I
at
think
least
that-
answering the questionnaire for the group.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I just worry about, if we're starting to, having to put a charge or, together for any particular committee and having half an hour to do it is, at least, from my standpoint, I'd find that very difficult to do without having some time for thinking about it, rumination, and rethinking language that has been put on paper rather than trying to get something done and approved perhaps in a single meeting. I don't know. I just worry about that.
And to Kevin's point earlier, anything that if we're trying to get information to folks with the agenda packet, that means whatever is going to be created would need to be created in about a week or so from today.
I think we're talking about putting that out for the meeting on the 4th, though, not on the 28th.
Right. Right. So Patrick, I think on the 28th, nothing would need to be prepared in advance because that work would happen then.
Oh, I see. Carving
Right.
the 30 minutes out
So-
to do the work.
Right.
Then. Okay.
Right. Anyone else want to weigh in on when they would like to do the work?
Go ahead, Kevin.
So I'm a little confused at this point. Are we talking about coming together on the 28th and chewing on this with a blank piece of paper and then
Yes.
approving it on the 4th?
Yes.
I
think what Sarah was, I don't want to speak for you, Sarah, but I'm going to try anyway. I think she was trying to find a way to maximize our time together instead of trying to find a separate time for folks to get together.
I just think coming together with a blank piece of paper is just like A lot of discussion and not much productivity.
Well, we'd be answering the questionnaire that Jeannie was sharing.
Yeah, but
Not a blank piece. It's not a blank piece of paper, Kevin.
it's an essay question, you know?
Jeannie, facilitate us.
No, I think I'm really impressed with how you guys have kind of leaned into this and you're taking it on. I think what's most helpful, Kevin, for what you were saying is if the people who, since you want the committees to draft the original charge and you can't really do work outside of a warned meeting, but people could come with ideas and even drafts, like Steve said, and for you to respond to. I'd also offer that if it takes a lot of time to determine the charge of the committee, then maybe it needs to take a lot of time because there's not unanimity on why you're having a committee. So, you could probably knock off several of them pretty quickly and maybe hit a wall in one or two and send them away to bring something back. Not everything has to be done in one night. If that makes sense.
Steve?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And there isn't necessarily a completely burning deadline in front of us to create some of these committees. So, and we are short on members, which we need to fill. So, if we can't come to a complete agreement on what one of these charges is going to be, then it gets, tabled to the next time.
So I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that we use time on the 28th. And folks that have expressed interest in different committees, it might be helpful if you could do a little bit of looking on your own. And Jean said she might have some things to share with us as well. So before the 28th, come with some thinking already, and we'll carve out 30 minutes to see what we can't get done. And I also just want to appreciate what Jean and Steve both said. One, if it's taking a really long time, that's a good indicator of something. And two, this sense of urgency they think we often have about things, that is good to just be reminded about. So we have an action item, but I don't think we're ready to actually take action. So unless there's anything else folks have on this, I think we can, if everybody okay with that plan?
Are we ready to take action on some of the older committees?
I think I'm going to say goodbye and thank you very much. And Krista,
Thank you so much.
You anymore.
Yes, thank you for hanging in there with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What do people think about taking action on some of the committees that are already in existence versus waiting to do it all on the 28th? Yes, take action on the ones that are already here. Okay. All right. So, do I have a motion to appoint representatives to the Community Engagement Committee?
I move that we appoint Krista, Liz, and Kristen? Bailey and Kristen.
Do we have a second?
Is 4 too many? How many members are we allowed without a quorum?
Is a quorum the current membership or the legal membership?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? Patrick,
So
what did we get from Dean?
I believe the clarity we've gotten from Dina is that it's of the full 13.
Okay.
So we're safe.
6 is okay, 7's too many. And I would strongly encourage to not have 6 on one committee because You're talking about a lot of committees.
Yeah. Well, those are the people that I remember expressing interest.
Right. And I think maybe we need to have some, if we appoint these folks now, there may be some flexibility as we decide on future committees for people to shift.
Yeah. People want to jump off. That's okay.
Okay, so do we have a second?
I'll second Krista.
Okay, all those in favor of appointing Krista, Liz, Bailey, and Kristen to the Community Engagement Committee, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Okay, and we need a motion to appoint representatives to the Negotiations Committee, which will form in the fall and be for negotiating with support staff on their contract. And the people that were interested were Steve and Aaron.
So moved.
Okay, Brad, and second,
Second.
Kristen. Okay, all those in favor of appointing Steve and Aaron as board representatives to the Negotiations Committee, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we need a motion to appoint a board representative to the Patricia A. Hannaford Career Center. Steve, are you still interested in serving in that position?
Yes.
Thank you. Appointing Steve Rooney to serve in that position.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, and do we have a second?
Kevin.
I'll second.
Kristen, second. Thank you. All those in favor of appointing Steve Rooney to represent the board at the Patricia A. Hannaford Career Center, please say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? Next, we need a motion to appoint Kim Farnham, who's expressed interest in being our community representative to the Hannaford Career Center.
So moved, Kevin.
And a
Second.
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 Steve, great.
And
All
I'll
those
just
in
add a little
favor?
clarity there, Krista.
Oh, yes.
We did a little digging into this. So the board representative has to be appointed every year. The community rep is an at-large rep, which is, I think, a 3-year term is what Jennifer found out. So I think what we would do is, appoint Kim and assuming she wants to fill all 3 years, when she has expressed interest in continuing, that we would appoint her for a 3-year term.
Okay. So should we amend the motion to reflect that this is a 3-year term?
That might be helpful just to be really clear.
Okay. Okay, so Kevin, will you make that amended motion for
So
a
I'll-
3-year term?
I'll move to appoint Kim Farnham for 3-year term to the Patricia Hannaford Career Center.
And Kristen, would you second again?
I'll second.
Great. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, and then we traditionally have a board member who represents the board at the Community Council at Mount Abe. And Liz, is that something you would be interested in continuing with? Interested and available? Great. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Steve. And a second?
Second, Kevin.
Kevin? Okay, all those in favor of appointing Liz Sayre to be the Community Council representative from the board, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. I think those are all the ones that were on our list. There's TBD. I'm wondering if we can take a 2-minute bio break. That's okay with everybody?
Here, here.
Okay. And then when we come back, we'll work through the rest of the agenda. All right. Be right back. Folks, when you're back,
I'm sorry, Krista, before you get started again, can I have some clarity on the motions?
sure.
Hang on one sec, let me pull it up because there's a lot going on. Okay, so the first one I have is appointing you, Liz Sayre, Bailey Lane Gordon, Krista Toy to the Community Engagement Committee, made by Steve Rooney, seconded by Krista. Is that correct?
I think it was by Aaron Jipner.
Thank you. And it makes sense to have Krista do it when she was in there. Aaron Gibner. Okay, and then the next one was appoint Steve and Aaron to the negotiations committee starting in the fall. That was made by Brad Johnson, and the second was,
I believe it was Kristen Toy.
and then the Hannaford representative was Steve Rooney, and that was made by Kevin, second by Krista. Kristen, sorry. And
That's
then, okay, and then Kim Farnham for a 3-year term as what again?
Community representative to the Hannaford Career Center Board.
Community representative.
I think it's community member at large is the official term.
Okay, community member at large. Thank you.
Large to that board, and that was made by Kevin.
Yes, for a 3-year term.
Yep, got that. And that was made by Kevin and seconded by Kristen.
Correct.
And then the last one was to appoint Liz Sayer as what?
The community council representative.
Might say Mount Abe Community Council. Just
Mount Abe Community Council.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. And that was made by Steve, second by Kevin.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep. Okay. Hopefully everyone is back. It's 8:34 and we tried really hard not to add too many other things to this meeting. My hope is that we can get through the remaining items before the executive session by 9. So somebody can help me keep us on track. That would be amazing. So we have the next item on our agenda is to fill the remaining board highlights assignments, and there's a link. Squinting to pull it up here. To some remaining spots. I think also that I would like to suggest if we have 2 meetings a month that we just make one highlight per month. And Bailey had agreed to do the next one. So that would be for the 14th and 28th. Bailey, are you still on board to do that? She may not be back.
She's got her thumb up.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so then for April, we have Liz. For May, Kevin, can you do both? Just the month of May, the 9th and the 23rd? Unmute if you're.
Yes, he's
putting his thumb up. Okay.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Great, thank you. And then we have Bailey again for June. Are you okay to do it again, Bailey, in June, or would someone else like to jump in?
I'm feeling like you should probably put my name in there at some point.
Okay. Kay Toy, you're our June person. How about that?
All right. Fantastic.
Awesome.
I may bounce it off of somebody else before I publish it. So be warned.
No problem. Okay, so that'll take us to the end of and then we won't meet again in July, and then we can hand this out at the retreat and fill it in for the next go round. So that's listed as an action item. So I guess we need a motion to approve Bailey, to approve the folks on the list. I don't know what the appropriate action item would be, but or the appropriate motion would be if someone wants to take a stab at it.
It could authorize you to sort of appoint people to fill those positions, and then you could plug them in as we just discussed.
So moved.
Okay. So Kevin is making a motion to authorize the board chair to appoint representatives to do the board highlights for their months of March, April, May, and June. Can we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Steve Rooney. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Due to John's departure, our next action item is to assign a board member to write the monitoring report for 4.5 board member code of conduct, ideally to be prepared for discussion and approval at the April 18th meeting.
That date would probably need to be amended, right? 11, is it 4th and 18th or? Oh yeah, 4th and 18th. You're right. Never mind.
Yep. I'm looking to see has everyone already done a monitoring report?
I have not.
Kristen, it's your night to shine, friend.
Oh, dear God.
So would someone be willing to help Kristen with writing this report since it's her first time around?
Sure.
Thank you, Steve. Okay.
I'm curious what happened to the last group report we put together. Did it get put out in a meeting that I didn't attend? Or no, it actually got reviewed and approved, didn't it?
I believe so.
Yeah, okay. Yep. All right. I'm just foggy for obvious reasons.
So can I get a motion to assign Kristen and Steve to work together on 4.5 board members code of conduct?
So moved.
Okay, Erin, and a second?
I'll second.
Sarah LaPearl.
Yeah.
All those in, sorry? Oh, I thought you said something. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you both.
Kristen, just let me know when you want to get together.
Sounds great. Thanks again. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Okay, the next action item is to approve the Community Engagement Committee's plan for a listen up screening. And you should have gotten that link in an email from me today. So if you need a moment to pull it up, I'm trying to do that myself.
I make a motion to approve the CEC plan for the listen up screening.
I'll second.
Okay. Seconded by Brad. Any discussion? Questions, thoughts? Kevin?
So it talks about grant money. Is it being applied for or has it been approved?
The deadline to apply for the 5-Town Friends of the Art grant is tomorrow, the 15th. And so if we approve this, we'll go forward with pursuing those funds. And I think it's of interest to the Community Engagement Committee to do this screening regardless. But this funding came up and also just seems like a great partnership opportunity. Or partnership might be the wrong word, but just fit nicely with some of the things they're trying to do and we're trying to do.
So
Go ahead, Steve.
Just to be clear, it sounded like in your description that the board was going to front $100 and then there was a $450 total fee, or is that in addition? Or
Sorry, I'm just looking at the grant itself. So while they didn't ask for any matching funds on behalf of the organization applying for the grant, we thought that it would be important to show our support for this. We're asking 5-Town Friends of the Arts for $425. And in addition to that, we are going to contribute monies because we wanted to offer committee members and students the opportunity to pre-screen the listen up screening, and that costs $15 per screening. So we wanted to just make sure there were money available to do that, or anything else that might come up that the grant doesn't cover.
and what is, just out of curiosity, what's the total amount of the grant application above the dollars you just talked about?
I'm not sure.
Is that just to a grant sort of implies that we're getting money from somebody to pay somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But we're getting 425 from one group and we're contributing 100, so that's 525. So the whole thing is more than that. It's like $1,000 or
No, no. The screening costs $200. And then we're asking for additional money to help with promotional costs and anything we might want to provide in the way of refreshments at the event. And we estimate that wouldn't be cost more than $425. And then on top of that, we wanted to set aside board funds if we needed to help ensure people could view the screening in advance of showing it to the community.
okay. So the screening grant is for $200.
The Friends of
screening-
the Art is who we're asking for the grant from. So they are the ones that they have a certain amount of money that they're offering people to write in and get a grant from. So the grant is from the Friends of the Art.
Okay.
Right. And I don't know that they have I think Kim Callahan is on, and I don't know if I put you on the spot for a second, Kim, but she's a community member who's been helping to write the grant. Maybe she can help clarify I don't think there's a specific amount that they are offering people that we're going for. We're just.
They offer, I think, up to $5,000.
Okay, there we go.
For various grants. So we're just asking for $425 to cover the costs. The costs itself, and then the $100 is what the district would give in order, as Krista said, for the committee members to view the screening before it's shown, and the same with students at schools, because it's important to get the kids involved and want them to help promote it within the school.
Okay. I'm sorry to be so nitpicky about it because it's not. I'm fully in favor of it, and just I was a little confused about the way that the thing was written about where the money was going and coming from. That's all.
Gotcha. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments? Liz?
Also, are we offering that board members could pre-screen or plan to come to the event? Hopefully, right?
Yes, we're
Should we offer
definitely
that?
you'll be hearing a lot more about this as it develops. So right now we're just trying to get this to the finish line for their grant deadline, which is tomorrow. But we're connecting with Community Council at Mount Abe, with Shannon Warden and Community Council at Mount Abe, to see if there's students interested in helping us promote the event. We'll definitely be coming to the board, hoping that you'll all be there and or help us promote the event. There's lots of opportunities here for folks to participate, and we'll definitely be looking to you to help us do that. I'll also add that I had the chance to connect with Sheila Sewell and their work around equity and that they're doing in their district, and they had planned to screen this event, but they were rethinking it for a couple of different reasons. And I shared with her that we were hoping to move ahead, and she was excited about the idea of offering their community the opportunity to come view it along with ours. So that could be a really nice partnership as well, and a way to get more people together to just hear about what young people are telling us is important to them. So, okay. So if there's nothing else, I will, I guess we'll take a vote. So all those in favor of approving the Community Engagement Committee's plan for the Listen Up screening and applying for the grant with the 5-Town Friends of the Arts, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Next is a discussion item that I added at the beginning of the meeting, which is filling board seats. So we've got 4 seats vacant right now. And I shared with you, I think, 2 links about from the VSBA was one of the links. And then another was kind of where we stand with our current board terms and when they expire. I can't figure out where that is right now. Here we go. So the information from the VSBA is really helpful in terms of like a strategy for getting the word out. The Front Porch Forum posting that I asked people to put out mentioned that we have some vacancies, but I think we'll need to do some really, and I know people have been great about doing some individual outreach, but I think we need to take a few minutes to talk about a little more deliberate of an approach. And I think we also need to figure out, and maybe you can help us with this, Patrick, or maybe this is something we need to look into. Right now we're in the position of needing to appoint people. And so I'm not entirely clear if we are appointing people for 1 year or if we can appoint them for 3 years, but you'll see on that spreadsheet of when folks' terms end that we're a little bit off kilter with our hopes of having everyone on 3-year terms and not everybody's terms expiring at the same time. So, Patrick, I don't know if you have any insight into that first part of our predicament.
Yeah, so as I understand it, when someone is appointed to fill the position, so it's a very specific seat that they're appointed to fill, and those different seats have different lengths of terms left, right, or different number of years left in the term. And when someone's appointed, they're appointed for that specific seat, but only until the next regularly scheduled election. So that would be essentially, if they were appointed tonight, it would be for 1 full year until next town meeting, when they would have to run to keep that seat.
And that next available election is for just the remainder of the current term?
Correct.
Yeah, so that's how you keep the offset, is by the election only running till that term expires, so that you get the offset that was originally created.
Right. So a person could theoretically be appointed for 1 year, run and get elected and fill 1 more year, and then that term is up, and then they have to run again,
right,
and get elected to the full 3-year term.
Yeah, Kristen might be in that boat right now.
Kristen?
Well, she had to run this year, and I don't know when her term. Well, I don't know when. Well, actually, she's a brand new member.
No,
Yeah.
she's been appointed, and
No,
she won the election, so she has a term.
Right, but I mean, she wasn't filling an original board seat. The board seats got shuffled because Lincoln left.
Right.
So she's actually filling a brand new seat for Starksboro anyway, and I don't know if that was supposed to be spaced out to be one of Lincoln's.
Yeah, I think that one of Lincoln's was apportioned to Starksboro, and whether it was a 1-year term or a 3-year term or a 2-year term, I don't remember. And then the other one was apportioned to Moncton, which hasn't been filled. Kristen, do you know? I mean, are you on for a 2-year term now, or do you know, or a 3-year term?
I think I'm 3.
Yeah.
We can look into that. There was
Yeah.
intentionality in which of the Lincoln seats went to Moncton and which went to Starksboro, because their terms ended in different years.
Right.
And there was a strategy around, like, for the 3 Starksboro seats, to try and have them each end in a different year. So there's not 2 of 3 Starksboro seats open in any 1 year, and then the same for Moncton.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and Krista's sheet that she sent out, it looks like Steve, Brad, and I are both spaced out by a year each. So if that is indeed true, then hopefully we as a town are set.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that these have been Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sarah.
I was just gonna say the New Haven one's incorrect. So that one was up in 2020. Andrew finished in 2022, and he and then that one would have been up in 2025.
So Patrick's position that he resigned from, Patrick.
Yeah, but he came into the after he was never elected. So Andrew finished in 2022.
Okay. And so that term would have been 22 to 25.
Yep.
And that's the term that Patrick got appointed to, but never
Yeah,
made
he
it
wasn't
through to
there
be
very
elected.
long. So,
So that needs to be changed to 2025.
yep.
Okay.
Just because if you're talking about getting off kilter, I feel like that's a number that would
Yeah. So, sorry, I'm going back and forth between the spreadsheet and the, Patrick, were you going to say something?
No, just that we can reconfirm, like we can go back to the original Act 46 Articles of Agreement that spell out town by town what positions or what seats start when and end when, and map that out for 3-year terms, and confirm the accuracy of what's left for lengths of terms.
Yeah, and maybe what we'll do, and Jennifer and I did a little bit of that today, but yeah, it sounds like we might still need to get more clarity. So maybe what we can do now is just talk about what our plan might be for recruiting folks, and then we will get back as soon as we can with clarity around exactly what we're recruiting for, because that's an important part of people knowing what they are signing up for.
And really, at this point, the most anyone's signing up for is a year for the appointment.
Right.
They would then
Right.
have to choose to run to fill the rest of it.
Right.
Okay, right.
And if they want to run, they're probably going to win.
Should I take that personally, Brad?
Kristen, we've both run unopposed.
Yeah.
You ready for us?
Right.
I won't tell you what my campaign slogan was, but whenever I tell people, they laugh.
looking back at the spreadsheet from the previous years, because they're all linked on the bottom, it looks like it was Rob's position that Kristen now has, because Rob's position would have been up in 2023. And then Kristen did run for a 3-year position.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then you can look up Sandy's, and that would be the other Moncton one, right? And the rest of us should be kind of all set or clear.
Yeah.
Check our work.
Yeah.
And just as a side note, there were a handful of people milling about at town meeting after it was over, and there were questions as to when everybody's term ends. Who's a current board member, and there was the question if those dates would be able to be put on the MAUSD website. People, just for curiosity's sake, people were asking. I don't think it's a bad thing.
I think it's already on the website.
Yeah. I think so too. I think
Is
it's
it
on the
okay?
website.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does need to be updated though.
While we're talking about websites, Patrick, I do notice that when you go on your cell phone, you open up the website and there's a little tab at the bottom that says school board. You click on it, you get a 404 message instead of the website. So I'd throw that at you.
This is a 4-minute time check, Krista.
Thank you. Okay, Kevin,
So I guess the $100 question.
you muted yourself, friend.
I guess the $100 question, or maybe it's a $105 question with inflation, is I look at what the VSB Day has, and it's a great media campaign, but we've done that. So I don't know if that's going to stir up much of a crowd or what the alternative might be.
I mean, I think that we have to put that stuff out there in various ways, whether it's Front Porch Forum or what have you. But I think the key to generating interest is going to have to come from individual board members. It's not unlike a nonprofit board where current board members have to kind of do a little bit of digging and try to find people who might be interested and engage with them to talk about what the role entails and essentially do recruiting. I know that Kristen and I were working on one woman to fill Patrick's seat, and Kristen, I don't know what the status of that is now, but she was very interested, but then never really followed through.
Yeah.
But I really think that we individually kind of have to look at our, I'm dating myself here, our Rolodexes and just try to find some people who we think would be of service to the community and would be interested in it.
Bailey?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, good. The Moncton Select Board is putting together a list of seats that are available for all town things, and they're going to add the Moncton ones. And we do have a person interested in Moncton's, one of Moncton's empty seats, and had joined us tonight just to kind of listen and kind of see, as a community member, if this is something she would be interested in. I think most people that I've talked to really, there she is, there's Diana. Most people I talk to are really concerned about the time. And I think if we can shorten our meetings and really structure the committee stuff that we just started talking about, then people might be more willing to give it a try.
So in the interest of time, I wonder if, Bailey, would you be willing to work with me, since you're doing the board highlights, on a little blurb we could craft that just reminds folks that we have these open seats, maybe comes up with some encouraging language that people would consider, getting people to consider joining us. And then we can share it with the board put out in all the usual channels, make sure it's on the MASD website. And then in the meantime, taking Brad's advice also to, all of us think about some folks that we think would be interested in remembering that this is a one-year appointment. So it's kind of an opportunity to, hopefully you will stay, but it is a chance to dip your toe in and see if it's the right thing. So does that sound like a good plan moving forward? Okay. Diana, thanks for being with us. We hope you stick around.
Yeah, thank you. I meant to chime in earlier, but I was like, I'll just listen. But yeah, thank you. I saw we had some seats available, and this has been great. So
good.
Hopefully you'll see more of me.
Great. Do you have any questions? I mean, not to put you on the spot, but is there anything that you're like really wondering about right now since you're here?
I should. I know I've been like note taking everything with the committees, but well, I think the 1 year appointment seems less daunting to as a new person coming in. So I think that's really interesting. But no questions yet.
That's okay.
But I'm sure I'll poke Bailey and Nirma after.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for being with us.
Excuse me. Can I have Diana? Diana, could I have your last name for the minutes, please?
It's Hill. Hill.
Thank you.
Over in Moncton.
Okay, so that's it for the items on our agenda. We do have our meeting prep and evaluation. We have public comment, meeting prep, evaluation, and then going into executive session. So why don't we take a minute for public comment? Is there anyone from the public that's still with us that wanted to say something? Okay, I don't see anyone's hands raised. So do folks want to do the prep and evaluation now, and then we can go into executive session, letting people know that we won't be taking action when we come out? I see some nods. Okay, so meeting prep, review work plan and additional agenda items. So the board work plan is linked to the top of the agenda, and Patrick also sort of ran us through what we're thinking about for our next meeting. And so I think it's pretty well full. Is there anything else folks wanted to throw on the list of, if you scroll over all the way to the right to items to add to future agendas? Steve, I know you had something you wanted to throw out there.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we could get an update on where Nate is these days. Doesn't have to be long. Could be just a quick update as to what he's doing and what his schedule's looking like. And
Patrick, I don't have editing rights, but can you put that in there under?
Yeah, which date were we looking at for that?
well, that's the question. I mean, if the 28th looks
Right.
like it's mobbed and maybe it's the 4th instead, or
Well, I think we have that items to add to future agenda column, and I think on the 28th we were going to
we can always put
look
it
at
on-
those items and kind of decide and maybe do a survey prior to that on how we want to prioritize them.
Could also, if
But if
it's
we
just an update, it could be put at the end and we could table it if we're running late.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe if we captured in that column K.
Yep, I think I
Is
got
there-
it there.
Okay, great. Is there anything else people wanted to mention now for future agendas? Okay.
Do we need,
Uh,
is there an executive session set up to continue the discussion with MAEA? Or what are we waiting for an update from the study committee? There may have been news on that while I was not around. Does that question make sense?
It does make sense. I'm just chewing on it. We did get an update on Friday that went to, yeah, I think that there have been a couple of updates coming. There have been 2 updates, very broad updates that came to the MAEA leadership team, Patrick and myself. And so what I need to do is share those with the board. And I don't believe we've scheduled any additional meetings at this time.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, board evaluation. Erin, can you remind me if we were going to just use
Yeah, so we're just going to use this one now. I do have some ideas about how to change it so that we have one that we all agree on, but we haven't talked about it and we haven't had time to look at it. So
Okay, so when you say this one now, you mean the SurveyMonkey one?
yes.
Okay. Anyone able to pull that up and run us through that quickly?
I'll pull it up if no one
Okay,
else.
great. Thanks, Erin.
It's loading. Okay. Level of engagement, high or low? High.
Hi, yeah.
I see thumbs.
Agenda followed, yes or no?
Yep.
Yep. Any comments?
There were items added at the beginning per the beginning.
Does the chair effectively establish the agenda and materials for distribution to the board?
Krista did a great job coming out of the chute first time.
Crushed it. Crushed it.
Thank you.
Any comments besides that?
I'm still curious if we might consider starting the meeting by approving the agenda.
Okay.
Making a note of that, Steve.
Not to belabor the discussion on this, but what I do for the planning commission is the first item that says, is there any changes to the agenda? And if not, the agenda is implicitly approved. So it's not a formal action once there's not any changes to the agenda.
Well, it can also be dovetailed with the consent agenda. In other words, if you give people the chance to approve the agenda, then that's the moment where they can say, I'd like to pull something from the consent agenda.
Okay.
Just gives them that opportunity.
You captured that in the comments.
Okay.
Number 6 is the chair effective in fostering a professional culture, fair and open deliberation, full participation, and ensuring the integrity of board process.
Yes.
Comments? Other feedback for the chair?
I like that you asked to hear from everybody.
Yeah, I don't want to like call people out and put them on the spot, but I do want to make sure everybody shares their voice.
I kind of like the roll call.
On Zoom.
You can always pass.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. That's a good reminder.
What went well with the meeting?
Great presentations.
Okay. Any other suggestions for ways to improve future meetings? I'm just going to reiterate the approving agenda. Anything else? Okay, done.
Thanks to everybody for volunteering.
Yeah.
Do we have a separate Zoom for the
executive session?
Yeah.
We do not.
We don't. What had been happening recently has been when the executive session's at the tail end and we've done everything else, folks not invited into executive session have been signing off, and then we're fair to stay on the same link. So if that happens tonight, then that's wonderful. And if we need to, I can send a link out to the board.
The only issue with staying on is just, are you able to keep anybody from joining?
No, but we would know if someone joins, and then we would stop the conversation and address that before continuing on.
Okay.
Okay, so we need a motion to go into executive session. I have my new handy dandy, freshly printed out guide to open meetings. So I hope I do this the right way, but please somebody let me know if I'm not. So tonight we are going to go into executive session under VSA statute 313A. Hold on. A3, the appointment, employment, or evaluation of a public officer of employee. Provided, yeah, I think it's just under that appointment, employment, or evaluation of a public officer or employee. It's not our policy to speak about personnel issues in public.
And is this one of those where we have to come to prior?
No.
Okay. I'm so moved.
Okay, Steve, and a second.
I'll second.
Kristen, and Patrick, other than you, are we inviting anyone else in?
I don't think so.
Okay. So I guess, I don't know if we need to amend the motion, but just to be clear that we are inviting Patrick Green, superintendent, into the conversation. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, for everyone else on the Zoom, if you could please leave. Thank you for joining us, and we can stop the recording.